Welcome to Contemporary First Nation Voices. This is NBE 3C, grade 11 English college level. And this is Jillian Percy. Today is class 21, and we are working on lesson 11, key questions 31 and 32. Here are all the ways to contact me. I'm in the studio right now, and the number here is 1-800-465-7144. Or my office number is 1-800-667-3703, extension 2211. You can also email me at jillian.percy@nnec.on.ca. My Facebook is gpercywasa. It's a capital G, capital P, lowercase ERCY, space, capital W, lowercase AHSA. If you can see my screen, I've got like a little fall scene there, and then my little avatar. If you are sending messages to me on Facebook, make sure you've done a friend request and let me know what your proper name is. Like a lot of times we have a Facebook name that isn't our legal name, and then I can't find you in my database and I don't know what course you're registered in or that kind of thing. So if you just tell me who you are and what course you're registered in, that kind of makes the first part of the conversation go a little bit easier. There are two different YouTube channels that you can check out in order to see the previously recorded classes. There's my teacher channel, which is also called G Percy Wasa, and there will be a playlist. It will say NBE 3C playlist. You click on that, and it should have all the classes in order. It's usually pretty up to date. It might have like not maybe yesterday's class isn't on there or something, that kind of thing, but it's generally pretty up to date. And then there's the school YouTube channel that has all the teachers courses on that have been taught this year, nothing from last year. If you do see the NBE 3C course on YouTube, but taught by a different teacher, don't use that one. Make sure you use the one that I teach because it is a little bit different. Here are all the ways to hand in work. There are many, many ways to hand in assignments. If you are at a community that has a learning center, give it to the DEC, ask them to scan it, and they can email it to me. Hang on to your originals. A lot of the courses, including this one, have a portfolio project at the end that you're going to need to look back at your originals for, okay? Don't destroy them, keep them in a safe place. You can also fax them to me, 1-800-463-7852 if you're in Ontario, 1-877-990-2023 if you're anywhere else in Canada. If you're faxing them, try to make sure your writing is really dark, like working in pen or typed work is really good. Pencil sometimes comes up very faint and kind of make it hard for me to read. You can also scan it yourself using a scanner app on your phone, which I'll talk to you a little bit more about how to do on the next slide. Now, sometimes people ask about mailing it to me. You can, but honestly, mail is the worst way to do it just because it takes a while. If you do that, make sure you photocopy it first and hang on to your own originals. The problem is it can take 2 or 3 weeks to get to me and then another 2 or 3 weeks to get marking. And it can be really frustrating for people to have to wait that long for feedback. If you use Google Docs to do your assignments, a lot of people share documents with me through Google Docs. When you do that, just make sure you've given me permission to view it or to edit it. Sometimes people forget to do that part and then I can't actually see what they're trying to share with me. You could also hand in assignments by photograph through Facebook or by attaching it to an email. When you are doing that, please make sure that your photo is really clear and not blurry. Should be written in pen so it's dark enough for me to read. Your phone should be parallel to the assignment, not slanted, so that your writing doesn't get distorted. Please do not just click the share button. It will come up at a very odd size on my computer. And don't just cut and paste it into the body of the email. Instead, save your thing as a file and then attach it to an email. Every now and again, sometimes people will save the photo to like a document. If you do that, make sure the photo is the same size as the document. So don't put it as like a tiny little 2-inch image on the document. I won't be able to read it, right? It's got to be the same size as a page so I can actually read your writing. Whenever you hand in the work, always send it to the email studentwork@nnec.on.ca. You can include me in the email to make sure that I've seen it. When you do this, the secretary can log that you submitted the work, plus it's in that email database, so it can be retrieved if you don't finish the course this year, or if another teacher took over the course, things like that. Please always include your full name, the course name, the assignment number and name if it has one, right on the physical page. I don't see the email usually. So if there's nothing up top, I don't know who it's from or what assignment number it is, or even what course if I don't happen to recognize your name, right? If an assignment asks for both a rough and a good draft, please label which one is which and include them both in the same email, because I almost always am looking for signs of progress and improvement. So I need to see them both at the same time to make those comparisons. Okay. This little poster is basically how to use the scanner app called Adobe Scan, but I am guessing that it's probably pretty similar to any other scanner apps. I use Adobe Scan myself because it's free, for one thing, which is nice. Adobe Scan is considered a very reliable company, Adobe, and it seems pretty easy to use for me, and I'm not super techy, quite frankly. So once you've got it installed, open it up, hold your phone over the assignment you want to take a picture of, make sure it's steady, and see how this guy's got his kind of slanted? You don't want it slanted. You want your phone more directly right over your picture. And then you can adjust the borders. Like if you've got like half the table on, you can get rid of the table so that I'm just seeing your work, not your table. If there's more pages in the assignment, you just keep doing 2 and 3 over and over and over again until you've got all of the things saved. Then tap continue. Now it'll give you a chance to preview things, and you can decide, oh, wait, that's too blurry, I better take it over, or oh, wait, those 2 pages got mixed up and I can put them back in order. Save the PDF when you're done, give it a name, assignment 3 for NBE, 3C, or whatever it is, and then save it somewhere in your phone. Sometimes people put it into their Google Drive or their Dropbox or your phone storage system, whatever works for you, and then attach it to an email and send me the email. That's just kind of the best way for it to work. Okay, we are on week 6. This is a 9-week course. So we're getting kind of in the last little bit of this course. Today is March 19th, yeah. And we're working on, 31 and 32, and hopefully we'll get to these other courses. I don't normally have a class on Friday, but this week I will because I had to miss yesterday due to some medical appointments. Okay, if you were looking at the assignments, some have been added, changed, or eliminated. So the numbers I am showing you may not quite match your originals. You're welcome to hand in the original assignment or the revised version until the end of the school year. However, if you are doing this right now, I do suggest you call me and get the revised version if possible. These videos stay up, like they don't get pulled off of YouTube. So if it's next year, if it's September 2025, and you're still seeing this, please check in with me and make sure you've gotten the newest version and not an older version, okay? All right. So Unit 3 is all about the truth and reconciliation process. We are still on lesson 11. Okay. I was talking about this a little bit last time. I want to kind of talk about it a little bit more. Why are we studying and talking about these really horrible events? Many of the events we are studying in this unit are difficult to read about and to discuss. It may bring up feelings of shame, loss, grief, or anger. So why do we bother talking about it? Well, there are several reasons. There's a very common saying that those who do not study history are doomed to repeat it. And this saying implies that the study of difficult history is valuable because we can learn from it, learn why it began, hopefully, how it ended, and begin to understand how to prevent it from happening again. Sorry, I'm trying to take off a little piece of something that's there. Hang on. Okay. Secrecy was a key component in allowing many atrocities to take place around the world. That is also true in relationship to the residential schools. While there were some people that knew and approved of things that happened in the residential schools, there were many people across Canada that had no idea what was going on or that it had happened in the past and were very horrified to discover what had occurred. Telling the stories of what happened in residential schools allows all Canadians the opportunity and the responsibility to deal with the truth of what happened. Many residential school survivors also felt that the secrecy of what happened caused a sense of shame that also hurt them. And number 3, out of the many years of listening to the experiences of residential school survivors came the 94 calls to action. These calls to action are specific changes that the Truth and Reconciliation Committee created to address both the causes of why and how the residential school horrors came to be, as well as specific actionable steps that can be taken to help repair the damage that was done and create a more positive future for Indigenous people. Knowing what happened and seeing common elements to people's stories helped to create a vision of what needs to be done differently if we want a different future for Canada and Indigenous people. There is a link below to the full copy of the 94 calls to action. It's quite long. They've definitely not all been completed. Okay, so now we're going to this assignment, I've given you two options because I was worried that the original assignment might be too triggering, which is a firsthand account from a residential school survivor. If you feel that that will be challenging to read and you don't want to read it, that is absolutely fine, in which case choose option A. Option A is just a general article on the residential school system history. So whichever one works best for you, pick that one, do the reading, and then do the questions for it. You do not have to do both, you just pick one. Okay, so I tried to give options so people could work with whatever works best for their mental health. Okay, so option A is you go to the link below, you read the summary of the residential school system, and then you answer the questions below. This is from the Canadian Encyclopedia, Residential Schools in Canada. Now, this is the plain language summary, okay? There is a much longer version, which you are welcome to read. It is really long. This is a much shorter version that is probably a little bit easier to read, but if you want to see know more information, you can go back to the original. Once you're done reading that, here are the questions. When did residential schools begin, and what was their original purpose? Number 2, according to the article, what were some of the negative things that happened at the school to the children? Number 3, what was the schedule of a typical day like for a child in residential school? Number 4, when did the residential schools end, and why did they end? Number 5, why did the residential school survivors begin to speak about their experiences in 1990? What was their goal? And number 6, what was the result of the survivors speaking up? In other words, because they spoke up, what happened? Okay. And then here is option B. Option B, there is a link. It's on the CBC News channel. It's First Person Facing Genocide, Mohawk Institute, Latuc Residential School. If you follow that link, you will get there. And it's by Paul Dixon. So in a few sentences, summarize how Paul Dixon describes the way in which children were taken to the residential school. In a short paragraph, summarize the residential school experience as Paul describes it, like just kind of the day-to-day life. What was it like? And then number 3, after Paul left the residential school, how did it change him? And what are some of the steps he has taken to heal and to survive? So basically, I'm kind of breaking that article down into 3 parts so that you can kind of focus on each part, because it's kind of a little bit of a longer article. Number 4, this story is told in first person by an actual survivor of a residential school. This is a genre of literature sometimes called a personal recount or a memoir. After reading this text, do you feel that the personal recount is an effective way to learn about the residential schools? What makes it more or less effective than an article that looks at the general experience of Indigenous children in residential schools? And this is that's an opinion question. You get to decide what you think about that, okay? So before we get on to the apology, we're going to talk a little bit about the background to the apology, which we have talked about a little bit already, but I'm just kind of making sure that we're all on the same page here. So there is something called the Indian Residential Schools Settlement Agreement, which is the acronym or short form for that is IRSSA, so IRSA. The largest class action settlement in Canada and Canadian history to date, the Indian Residential Schools Settlement Agreement recognized the damage inflicted by the residential schools and established a multi-billion-dollar fund to help former students in their recovery. The IRSA, which came into effect in September 2007, had 5 main components: the Common Experience Payment, the Independent Assessment Process, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, Commemoration, and Health and Healing Services. So there were 5 different parts of it that were supposed to be working kind of together to meet the needs of the agreement. Aboriginal communities, governments, and church organizations have long struggled to heal the wounds inflicted by the residential school system. From the 1980s on, former students launched legal campaigns to push the government and churches to recognize the abuses of the system and to provide some compensation. In 1998, the federal government issued a statement of reconciliation that acknowledged the abuses suffered by former students and established the multi-million-dollar Aboriginal Healing Foundation. The alternative dispute resolution process was launched in 2003, providing an out-of-court mechanism for determining compensation and offering psychological support. The more comprehensive IRSA, which came into effect on September 19, 2007, resulted from discussions between representatives of former students, the Assembly of First Nations, and other Aboriginal organizations, the involved churches, and the federal government. Common experience payment. Under the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement, $1.9 billion was set aside for all former residents of the schools. Every former student would receive $10,000 for the first year of schooling and $3,000 for each subsequent year. According to Aboriginal Affairs in Northern Development Canada, 98% of the estimated 80,000 eligible former students had received payment by the end of December 2012, with over $1.6 billion in total approved for payment. Independent assessment process. And I'm going to kind of separate that for a second. There we go. In addition to the SEP, funds were allocated for the independent assessment process, which was an out-of-court process for resolving claims of sexual abuse and serious physical and psychological abuse. This is sort of above and beyond just sort of normally what was going on at the school. As of the 31st of December 2012, over $1.7 billion in total had been issued through the IAP. According to Dan Ish, Chief Adjudicator of the Indian Residential School Adjudication Secretariat, around 3 times more applications were received than expected. The settlement agreement also set aside $16 million for a 5-year Truth and Reconciliation Commission that would provide opportunities for individuals, families, and communities to share their experiences. The commission, established in 2008, was directed to raise public awareness through national events. For example, Winnipeg in June 2010, Inuit in June 2011, Halifax in October 2011, and Saskatoon in June 2012, and its support of regional and local activities. It would also create a comprehensive historical record on the residential schools and budget permitting a research center. By August 2012, the federal government had released over 941,000 documents to the TRC related to residential schools. So by the way, the comprehensive historical record not only includes like government records, school records, it also includes like survivors' stories were then recorded, because a lot of survivors were quite old and their stories may pass away with them, and they wanted to make sure that they have those stories on, somewhere where they can't be lost and can't be forgotten. So that also is kind of one huge part of that historical record idea. Okay, commemoration. An important part of the IRSA was the emphasis on acknowledging the impact of the residential schools and honoring the experiences of former students and their families and their communities. To this end, the settlement agreement established a fund of $20 million for commemorative projects, which just basically means like a memorial type thing, like remembering what occurred. This process involved the TRC, which would review and recommend proposals, and the AANDC, which would allocate the funds. In 2011, for example, the TRC recommended 72 proposals, 3 of which were withdrawn, and a final 69 projects received a total of $8.5 million from the AANDC. So basically, communities or regions around Canada would kind of come up with proposals for ways they thought it would be appropriate to have a memorial of some sort regarding residential schools, and they would drop a budget and say, here's what we think we need to do this memorial. And then the TRC would kind of look at it and approve yes or no, whether it was appropriate or useful or kind of on track. Okay, health and healing services. The settlement agreement also included $125 million for the Aboriginal Healing Foundation, and it established the Indian Residential Schools Resolution Health Support Program. This program would provide support for former students in terms of mental and emotional health, with the services provided by elders and Aboriginal community health workers, as well as psychologists and social workers. So those like basically mental health counselors, people who are familiar with the residential school experience, familiar with its effects, and are going to be able to provide help to individuals who are suffering from flashbacks, trauma, whatever kind of things are occurring due to the experiences that they went through or that their family went through. That's kind of a big part of this project as well, was acknowledging that it didn't just hurt the people that went to the school, it hurt the communities that lost those people, it hurt the families that those people came back to. There was kind of an ongoing damage that was done, not just to the individual, but to the entire community. Criticism. While the IRSA has distributed large amounts of money in compensation and assisted residential school survivors in their recovery, the system is also open to abuse. In particular, some former students who applied for additional compensation under the IAP were the victims of unethical private lawyers who charged their clients high fees in addition to the 15% they received from the Canadian government. In other words, they were already getting paid and they charged their clients extra money, which they really weren't supposed to do. They could charge their clients up to 15% for very difficult cases, but it was meant to be an exception, not something that was routinely applied. However, a number of lawyers just got into the habit of routinely applying that percentage. And others applied improper interest, fees, and penalties, which was not supposed to happen. Chief Adjudicator Dan Ish led investigations into a number of private lawyers who were involved in the IAP that led to one disbarment, like they lost their license to practice law, and an expulsion from the IRSA, among other penalties. Okay, so now we're kind of moving on to the actual apology, because this was a very a big thing that kind of really got pushed for. It wasn't really, I don't believe at the time that Harper was really planning to do this. He kind of got to a spot where he realized this was going to have to happen, and this is kind of a description of how it looked. There's a circle of 11 chairs on the floor of the House of Commons. It shows that this is no ordinary day in Parliament. The chairs are for 5 Aboriginal leaders and 6 residential school survivors who have been invited here for an extraordinary event, an apology from the Government of Canada for residential schools and the damage they caused to Aboriginal people. In this live special broadcast from CBC News World, Prime Minister Stephen Harper recognizes the wrongs of the past. Today, we recognize that this policy of assimilation was wrong, has caused great harm, and has no place in our country. The Government of Canada sincerely apologizes and asks the forgiveness of the Aboriginal peoples of this country for failing them so profoundly. That's just kind of a small part that isn't the entire thing. Okay. Harper's apology is followed by remarks from the Liberal leader Stephanie Dion, who acknowledges his party's complicity in the residential school policy, having governed Canada for 70 years in the 20th century. 2 more federal party leaders, Gilles Duceppe of the Bloc Québécois and Jack Layton of the NDP, reflect on the apology and rebuke the Harper government for not endorsing the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. From the circle, Phil Montaigne, who was the national chief of the Assembly of First Nations at that time, responds to the apology to cheers from the viewing galleries. Never again will we be the Indian problem, says Fontaine. Today is the result of the righteousness of our struggle. Fontaine is followed by eloquent, heartfelt remarks from Patrick Brazeau of the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples, Mary Simon of Inuit Tapirilit Kanatama, Clement Chartier of the Métis National Council, and Beverly Jacobs of the Native Women's Association of Canada. Here is a picture of all those people. They're in Parliament there. Okay, hang on. The next one is of Harper, and those are kind of some of the other MPs behind him. Okay, so for key question 32, there is a video. The link that was in your unit, when I went to check it, it was broken. It didn't pull up what it was supposed to pull up. So I found a different link in YouTube. This one I think is a little better. It's from APTN, so I think it includes a little bit more than the original link did. If for some reason this link also becomes broken, you could simply put in 2008 Stephen Harper apology on residential school. There's more than one video of it. Try to get the longest video you can, and some of them they kind of cut him short. And when they do that, they almost always cut off the Aboriginal leaders or the opposition leaders. And there are some questions in here about that. I've also included a link here to the text of the speech in case, because again, I'm asking questions about the text. So if you want to look at the text and read it, if that's an easier way for you to understand it, then you can do that as well. I'm including the full text here so you can kind of see it. Now, keep in mind the original full text, he would have been flipping back and forth between English and French. So here we're just doing the one version, not both. This is part now of the Canadian Government of Canada website, so you can go there and find that if you want to. Statement of apology to former students of Indian residential schools. On Wednesday, June 11th, 2008, the Prime Minister of Canada, the Right Honourable Stephen Harper, made a statement of apology to former students of Indian residential schools on behalf of the Government of Canada. Okay. The treatment of children in Indian residential schools is a sad chapter in our history. For more than a century, Indian residential schools separated over 150,000 Aboriginal children from their families and communities. In the 1870s, the federal government, partly in order to meet its obligation to educate Aboriginal children, began to play a role in the development and administration of these schools. Two primary objectives of the residential school system was to remove and isolate children from the influence of their homes, families, traditions, and cultures, and to assimilate them into the dominant culture. These objectives were based on the assumption Aboriginal cultures and spiritual beliefs were inferior and unequal. Indeed, some sought, as it was infamously said, to kill the Indian in the child. Today we recognize that this policy of assimilation was wrong, has caused great harm, and has no place in our country. 132 federally supported schools were located in every province and territory except Newfoundland, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island. Most schools were operated as joint ventures with Anglican, Catholic, Presbyterian, or United Churches. The Government of Canada built an educational system in which very young children were often forcibly removed from their homes, often taken far from their communities. Many were inadequately fed, clothed, and housed. All were deprived of the care and nurturing of their parents, grandparents, and communities. First Nations, Inuit, and Métis languages and cultural practices were prohibited in these schools. Tragically, some of these children died while attending residential schools, and others never returned home. The government now recognizes that the consequences of the Indian residential schools policy was profoundly negative, and that this policy has had a lasting and damaging impact on Aboriginal culture, heritage, and language. While some former students have spoken positively about their experiences at residential schools, these stories are far overshadowed by tragic accounts of the emotional, physical, and sexual abuse and neglect of helpless children and their separation from powerless families and communities. The legacy of Indian residential schools has contributed to social problems that continue to exist in many communities today. It has taken extraordinary courage for the thousands of survivors that have come forward to speak publicly about the abuse they suffered. It is a testament to their resilience as individuals and to the strength of their cultures. Regrettably, many former students are not with us today and died never having received a full apology from the Government of Canada. The government recognizes that the absence of an apology has been an impediment to healing and reconciliation. Therefore, on behalf of the Government of Canada and all Canadians, I stand before you in this chamber so central to our life as a country to apologize to Aboriginal peoples for Canada's role in the Indian residential school system. To the approximately 80,000 living former students and all family members and communities, the Government of Canada now recognizes that it was wrong to forcibly remove children from their homes, and we apologize for having done this. We now recognize that it was wrong to separate children from rich and vibrant cultures and traditions, that it created a void in many lives and communities, and we apologize for having done this. We now recognize that in separating children from their families, we undermined the ability of many to adequately parent their own children and sowed the seeds for generations to follow, and we apologize for having done this. We now recognize that far too often, these institutions gave rise to abuse or neglect and were inadequately controlled, and we apologize for failing to protect you. Not only did you suffer these abuses as children, but as you became parents, you were powerless to protect your own children from suffering the same experience, and for this we are sorry. The burden of this experience has been on your shoulders for far too long. The burden is properly ours as a government and as a country. There is no place in Canada for the attitudes that inspired the Indian residential school system to ever prevail again. You have been working on recovering from this experience for a long time, and in a very real sense, we are now joining you on this journey. The Government of Canada sincerely apologizes and asks the forgiveness of the Aboriginal peoples of this country for failing them so profoundly. Nuligregeton, we are sorry. Nimetayen, Ninchine Wesemen, Mamia Dakut. In moving towards healing, reconciliation, and resolution of the sad legacy of Indian residential schools, implementation of the Indian residential schools schools settlement agreement began on September 19, 2007. Years of work by survivors, communities, and Aboriginal organizations culminated in an agreement that gave us a new beginning and an opportunity to move forward together in partnership. A cornerstone of the settlement agreement is the Indian Residential Schools Truth and Reconciliation Commission. This commission presents a unique opportunity to educate all Canadians on the Indian residential school system. It will be a positive step in forging a new relationship between Aboriginal people and other Canadians, a relationship based on the knowledge of our shared history, a respect for each other, and a desire to move forward together with a renewed understanding that strong families, strong communities, and vibrant cultures and traditions will contribute to a stronger Canada for all of us. On behalf of the Government of Canada, the Right Honourable Stephen Harper, Prime Minister of Canada. Okay, what is your reaction to Stephen Harper's apology? What are some elements of the apology that you think are good? What are some elements of the apology that you think are poor or are missing from the apology? Please note, any honest reaction to his apology is acceptable. Some people may feel relief, some have expressed sadness or rage or disbelief. Your reaction is your own and it is perfectly legitimate. I am simply offering you a chance to share your feelings on this issue before we analyze the event a little bit. A pivotal moment like this often needs to be looked at both emotionally and intellectually, and I don't want to neglect one for the other. Elements just means any part of the speech you want to talk about. It could be things like the actual words he used. It could be the way he delivered the speech, his tone, his facial expression, his gestures. It could be what topics he covered or what topics he left out, the emotions he expressed or that he didn't express, sincerity or lack of sincerity, or literally anything else you want to comment on about the speech. Number two, the leaders of the opposition parties also said some apologies. What are some important elements of their additional apologies? Now, again, for that part, you do have to go to YouTube. I can't play it right now because we post these classes later on YouTube and they don't like us to include other videos. Number three, how did some of the Indigenous leaders that were there listening respond to his apology? So make sure if you get the clip that I've got, they stand up and speak and they say stuff. If you get a video where they've edited that out, try to make sure that you find one where they have spoken, okay? All right, number four, read De Benamison to Own Ourselves by James Sinclair on page 101 in our textbook, Strength and Struggle. After reading, explain why you think the author chose the title To Own Ourselves. So when you look at this article in your textbook, the very first few pages is the Stephen Harper's speech that we've already looked at, which I didn't realize originally. So I'm not going to repeat that here. And then there's the part where he is responding to the speech and saying what he thinks about the speech. This article originally appeared in Urban Indian, July 2008. So it says, 2 events defined my June 11th, 2008. The first came at 2 p.m. when I watched and listened with anticipation, anxiety, and anger as the Prime Minister of Canada apologized for the institution and legacy of the residential school system. During those next few hours, I, like many, recounted the numerous traumas embedded in the histories of our communities, our families, and our people. I thought of the experiences of my family, my partner's family, and countless parents, aunties, uncles, and friends. I thought of what happened years later in both their own and their children's lives. I thought of what my cousins and I live with today. I thought of our leaders who, although far from perfect, bravely fought to get what National Chief Phil Fontaine called the achievement of the impossible. I thought of some of our non-Native allies who fought alongside Indigenous peoples, even as these contributions are hardly ever known. I thought about how, for many, including myself, the apology was an historic opportunity and a chance, perhaps a small one, at a new future. I thought about how, for some, it would not be acceptable. And I thought about how both views are right. I thought about the racism that went into these schools, the arrogance that justified abusing children, and the shadow of white privilege that stretches into today, evident even in this very space where the ceremony took place. The House of Commons is the place, after all, where French and English continue to be privileged and supported as the founding nations, languages, and cultures of Canada. It is also the place where a Department of, quote, Indian Affairs, unquote, enforces legislative authority over, quote, Indians and lands reserved for the Indians, unquote. It is also the place that for years refused to ratify the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which includes, among other things, basic protections against cultural and political assimilation, as well as an acknowledgement of the collective right to live in freedom, peace, and security as distinct peoples, and not be subjugated to any act of genocide or any other act of violence, including the forcibly removing of children of one group to another group. Let's not forget, it took 141 years, or the entire time that Canada's been a nation, for Native leaders to speak in the House of Commons officially to Canadians. I thought about the infinite ways that all lives, Native and non-Native, have been touched by residential school experiences. And, for good or for bad, I shed more than a few tears during the apology. Then, in the middle of my crying and remembering, my 2-year-old came over to me and with her little arms grabbed me around the neck. Da, 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 she said, refusing to let go, and I held her right back. She asked me why I was crying. Together we watched the rest of the speeches, and I tried telling her why. She seemed worried about me, so I told her we could go outside, and then we dug up some worms in the garden. It's her favorite thing to do. Afterward, my daughter and I went for a drive to get some ice cream. It was a warm afternoon, and I thought we both deserved it. Which leads me to the second event. Coming up Main Street and reaching the intersection at Euclid Avenue in the north end of Winnipeg, I saw him. A man passed out in the middle of the intersection, dozens of cars passing by, his lady friend trying to lift him up, failing, falling. The man face down on the pavement. More cars passing by. One vehicle passing through the intersection slowly drove around him. It was like he wasn't there, but he was, if that makes sense. Without really thinking, I stopped, got out, and locked our van, right in the middle of traffic. Are you all right? I asked the man. A black truck slowed down to watch us before speeding away down the street. It was an old Native man, looked in his 60s, probably somebody's mishum, maybe even a relative. I couldn't help but think, particularly in the context of the day, that he was very likely a residential school survivor. He certainly reminded me of my grandfather. By this time, 8 cars had stopped behind our van, creating quite a little jam. None of them honked or told me to move or cursed at me. None of them got out to help either. They just sat there. Through the windshield, I could see my daughter in her car seat, watching too. The man tried to stand and speak. In the state he was in, both were difficult, so I helped him. Then a young man, native too, I think, ran out into the intersection to help. We put the elder's arms around our necks and we walked him to a nearby bus stop bench. I gave the young man $20 to go and buy the man something to eat. He came back 3 minutes later with Cokes and sandwiches. Returning to our van, I opened the door and climbed inside. Da 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 da, said my daughter as we drove away. Since then, I have thought a lot about those two events. I have heard countless writers, reporters, and pundits debate the significance of the apology. I've heard one short-sighted writer claim that it was meant to give Native peoples healing. No apology, no words, and certainly no time in Parliament can give healing. No passing of any bill or law will do that either. Money, resources, and time might help, but none of these ultimately can do the job. Healing is on all of us as Indigenous peoples to do ourselves. Others can help us, and this is important, but we can't wait for anybody else's help. We can't wait for others to say story, to listen to our experiences, or to get out of their darn cars. To attain healing, we have to be as brave as our children, who take the risk of loving us, no matter how complex we are or how many mistakes we make. We have to have the courage to bravely inherit our lives, our communities, and our nations by helping ourselves, even if this results in the digging up of many words. Here, Cultural Coordinator John Fox comforts a residential school survivor during a smudging cleansing ceremony in Toronto, Ontario, while Prime Minister Stephen Harper reads the statement of apology on the television. One opportunity to do this will be during the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where we will have a chance to share our stories of residential schools and their legacies, while listening to others in a spirit of compassion, respect, and honesty. It won't be easy. The past will be both beautiful and ugly, and sometimes both at the same time. That's all I know it will be. But we must do so ourselves. That is how you achieve the impossible. What inspired me to write this selection? I wrote this piece reflecting on the irony I witnessed on the day of the apology for residential schools. It's about choices, the different paths we're traveling on as peoples and nations, and considering the distance we have yet to go. I also wrote it in the hope that my daughter would read it one day and realize how much she has taught me. So the man who wrote this, by the way, was the chief commissioner for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So he was extremely instrumental in coordinating all those kind of events, and this is kind of his reflection on it. This is kind of at the beginning of it, because it went on for quite a few years. So there are some other stuff later on where he kind of reflects back many years down the road on this, but we're not there yet. So the author begins the essay by saying that two events defined my June 11th, 2008. Briefly describe the two events. How does the author feel about the connection between these two events? How do the photos included add to the meaning of the essay? So I can't remember. I think I included all the photos, but check your textbook first, make sure. Sorry, still recovering from a little bit of a cold here. It has been almost 17 years since that apology speech was made. Do you feel that this speech helped to change Canada's relationship with Indigenous people? Has it made an impact on the everyday lives of Indigenous people? Explain why or why not. Now, I want to point out, this question is entirely an opinion question. There is no right or wrong answer. Whatever you think is totally fine. However, because we're writing for school, it's important when you state your opinion to provide some reasons and examples to help support your statements. For example, you might say something like, I do believe that it's made an impact because I have noticed, or because this has changed, or I don't believe that it's made an impact because this is still happening, or because I still see, or because whatever it is. But try to provide some reasons from either your own experiences or what you see going on around you for why you believe it was or was not a major impact on the everyday lives for Indigenous people. Hang on. Oh, and is that really it? Yep, that's really it. Okay, so like I said, I know this unit is kind of a challenging one. We're going to be continuing this unit for the rest of this week. I don't know if we're going to be talking about next week as well, maybe a little bit. If you are having trouble, you're welcome to reach out for help. You can always talk about alternative assignments if you need. I've tried to provide some options so that you have the opportunity to do what works best for you. And if you have any questions about how to do assignments, please contact me through Facebook or email or phone, and I would be happy to talk to you. Take care, and I will be back tomorrow with our next class.